It's Sunday, March 26, 2023. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we take a deep dive into the news of the week. You can subscribe to my work and get exclusive access to bonus content, live Q&As and more at patreon.com/5minutenews. Joining us today is the former Chief Assistant District Attorney of the Manhattan DA's office and co-host of the Legal AF podcast, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Karen, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, you must be pretty busy at the moment. Even though you're not in the DA's office anymore, you have knowledge, you have connections, and you have instinct. And that's really what I'm kind of interested to kind of tap into today. Donald Trump said or told his base last Saturday that he was going to be arrested on Tuesday. Turned out that was a lie. Everybody fell for it. Media fell for it. His base fell for it. There was about 6 people protesting outside Trump Tower. It's turning out now that even just saying that and pushing for his Republican friends to write a letter to Alvin Bragg to kind of say what you're doing is unconstitutional and we want more information, that in itself could be a crime in New York State. Is that right?
Well, if, potentially, yes, I guess it could be. He's what he tweeted on the 24th on Friday about, there's going to be death and destruction. I mean, that's like a clarion call for mayhem. Really what he should be saying is I can handle this and surrender and take it like a man and fight it in the courts the way everybody else does who claims and proclaims their innocence. But instead, he's acting like a cornered, scared, dog, and he's lashing out and basically saying there's going to be death and destruction in the streets if this happens, which his supporters all know what that means. That's a call to do what they did on January 6th. And he's trying to intimidate and bully the Manhattan DA's office and the New York City Police Department. And it's not going to work. His bullying tactics will not work. And the district attorney is going to put his head down and follow the facts wherever they lead. And if it's appropriate to charge him with a crime, that's what he will do.
The irony of all of this is that Trump has denied that he's incited violence on January 6th, right? And so Jack Smith is looking into that aspect, in the insurrection. And yet here he is again inciting violence once more. I mean, he's effectively destroying his own case, isn't he?
Well, he has this fascinating quality to him, which is if you say something, it makes it true. And that's what he believes, whether it's, I have the biggest crowd at my inauguration and then you don't, or like he'll just say things as if they are true. And so sometimes he does them, I think, to bait you for information. And that's what I think the Tuesday, I'm being arrested Tuesday was for. I think he couldn't stand the fact that he didn't know and that he had no idea when it was happening, so that if he were to say I'm being arrested Tuesday, he could bait the Manhattan DA's office into giving him information or leaking information. But the DA's office, typically they're very good about not leaking, so, he does things for different reasons, but your guess is as good as mine as why he says certain things, but he will just actually make stuff up. It's ridiculous to me. The truth doesn't matter to him.
What's so interesting is he really, in this kind of moment of anxiety, and we're feeling his anxiety through his Truth Social posts, it's really kind of exposing what we all assumed was this, this intense kind of inane self-obsession and upset, mental illness basically on full display. And it comes out in this kind of stream of consciousness with these messages without, as you say, no consideration for the legal ramifications, because the more he seems to type, the more obvious it is that this guy is completely unfit for the role of president or even, leader of the Republican Party as a candidate.
Yeah, he's completely unhinged. I mean, his all-cap screeds where he just, basically calls for violence. I mean, everybody knows what he's talking about. And he just, he says things like, it's not me that's being arrested, it's you that's being arrested. It's China and Russia are laughing. Yeah, China and Russia are laughing at us because we elected you. I mean, that he just doesn't, he doesn't have any sense of what he's doing and saying, yet it works. It works for his base. It's a fascinating, I think, look into the division in our country that's been simmering, for a century, for centuries. I mean, and he's just bringing it all out right now at this moment in time.
Just explain the kind of legal ramifications of because obviously most of us have been wanting this guy to be arrested ever since he tried to extort Volodymyr Zelensky on the telephone. It's like he was impeached for that, and that's really where this whole saga should have ended. But because he was given a pass by the Republican Senate at the time, he then went on to keep committing these crimes, and then of course COVID and that was death and destruction and negligence on his behalf. But the biggest concern amongst people kind of watching this is he ever going to face the music? Is Alvin Bragg going to make this happen? And just explain how there might be a kind of coordinated effect. If once there is an indictment, of course, you've got Georgia, you've got Fannie Willis, you've got Letitia James, you've got all these other people after him, in addition to the special counsel. How does it integrate? How does it come together? Because they're not going to do this unless they're absolutely certain that they've got him on multiple counts, right? Well,
look, it's interestingly, it's not coordinated at all. These are all separate investigations and separate entities that are looking into him. The only thing that was coordinated was the Letitia James civil investigation into his properties and his finances and her sweeping $250 million civil case was coordinated with the Manhattan DA's office investigation. They were actually joint investigations. That investigation into the valuation of his assets, where he overinflated or underinflated his assets depending on when it suited him, whether he would lie about the square footage of his apartment so that he could, take out a bigger loan or pay less taxes, whichever one it suited him. And that investigation is still ongoing at the Manhattan DA's office. That was one that, if you recall, about a year ago, there were two senior assistant DAs who resigned very publicly because Alvin Bragg, only 2 months into his tenure, they thought that there was enough evidence, and Alvin Bragg wasn't ready to bring that case at that moment, and they basically had a temper tantrum and took their crayons and went home. And one of them wrote a book about it, as if he somehow knows better, as if someone, elected him DA and he has his judgment and knows better. And I think, that particular case, Alvin's been saying publicly that that's still pending and still open, and they're still working on that. But I now wonder whether that still has any viability, given this book that has now infused politics and other things into a case that
it's kind of compromising the investigation.
It's
in a
completely
way,
compromised it.
But what kind of a person is working at the Manhattan DA's office with that mentality that they would then go out and write a book and compromise the whole thing? I mean, who is this person?
Yeah, he never worked at the Manhattan DA's office before. He never ever worked there. He came in, he was a federal prosecutor, and then he's been a defense attorney for a long time. I don't know him. I've never worked with him. But he was brought in to do this case, and frankly, I have to say, for him to write this book, to have the judgment to write this book, to me, shows that Alvin Bragg actually was right not to trust his judgment, frankly. So
it helped the other side a lot, didn't it?
Completely.
Trump and his surrogates, they used that moment of disarray to basically say that, this was a corrupt investigation.
Look, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that book. First of all, there are some, several people, including Ellie Honig, has written kind of all of the, things that are wrong about the book, factually as well as intellectually as well as politically. And so people should read that. It's really, but I take issue with it too, because he goes after the, line assistants in the office, and I don't know. The whole thing to me shows really poor judgment. And now, like I said, now any prosecution there would look political, frankly, because of what he has done. And politics don't belong anywhere in prosecution. It really has to be separate. It really has to be without fear or favor. The DA is always a Democrat in New York City, or in Manhattan, I should say. And they have to be able to prosecute without fear or favor, Democrats and Republicans alike. And for Donald Trump, who thinks that this is a political prosecution, and that Alvin Bragg, is coming after him just because it's for political reasons. If that were the case, why wouldn't Alvin Bragg have brought that other case that was allegedly ready to go 2 months into his tenure? I mean, that was, that would have been the easiest thing you could have done, right? If this was nothing but a political, I'm going to get Donald Trump. They handed him a case that they temper tantrum stormed away saying it was ready. I shouldn't say they. The other ADA, Carrie Dunn, is actually an extraordinary, excellent attorney who I worked with, and I think he's phenomenal. And as far as I can see, he didn't leak his resignation letter or have anything to do with this book. But the other one, Mark Pomerantz, is the one whose judgment I have to say I really, when they first resigned, I thought to myself, wow, are they national heroes? But I now really have to say I'm kind of appalled, actually. But back to your question about these various cases and any coordination, really prosecutors don't work like that. They're not out there conspiring to get Donald Trump. They're looking at the facts and the evidence and seeing what evidence is admissible in court. And they're not thinking about politics and violence and all the things Donald Trump is trying to do. They're really, without fear or favor, thinking about, did this person commit a crime, and can I prove it? And if so, I'm going to hold them accountable, because nobody is above the law. And, the whole charging Donald Trump with falsifying a business record, which is what I think they're going to charge him with here, and I'll explain that in a minute, is the bread and butter of the Manhattan DA's office. It's charged, Ryan Goodman published an opinion piece in the New York Times this week about a study that he and another individual, I think it was Andrew Weissman, and he, for Just Security, they surveyed the last, I think, 10 years, how many times all 5, New York City DAs have charged falsifying a business record. And it's, so many times, right? It's like, dozens and dozens and dozens every year. Everybody charges it. This is not some, so regular people are charged all the time with falsifying a business record in the first degree. And the elements of this crime are, that you, with the intent to defraud, you make a false entry in a business record. And that is a misdemeanor, right? So you intend to defraud and you make a false entry into a business record. What makes it a felony, so what bumps it up to a felony, is if you by doing so, you're either concealing or committing a crime. If you're intending, I should say, to conceal or commit a crime. You don't have to prove that you did commit a crime or concealed a crime, just that you intended or you meant to or you were trying to. And so that's the elements of the crime here, and that's what I believe the case that Alvin Bragg is looking at. And the facts of the case that lead to that are, it's been well publicized that a couple of weeks before the 2016 election, Stormy Daniels got in touch with the National Enquirer and offered to sell her story that she had an affair with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump didn't want that to get out. And so Michael Cohen arranged with David Pecker to pay her $130,000. And that came from Michael Cohen, and Donald Trump paid Michael Cohen back. But rather than just giving him a check for if Donald Trump had just written him a check for $130,000,
would have saved a whole lot of bother, right?
This wouldn't even be a crime, right?
Yeah.
There'd be no crime here, other than potentially, I guess he could be prosecuted for trying to influence the election if there was evidence of that in and of itself, federally. But here, what he did instead was he wrote. So then he gets elected as president, and he 11 different times while he's the sitting president, 11 times he writes these checks and classify them in a business record, a business entry as a legal retainer, which there was no such thing. And so, we had a sitting president actively committing a crime and faking the books and records of his organization while he's president of the United States. And for anyone to say that that's not a serious crime, I mean, first of all, this is the first time he tried, that we know of, that he tried to influence the results of his presidential election by doing this, right? And of course, he tried again with the big lie, 4 years later, and all the other things that he was doing there, but trying to stop the electoral count, et cetera, et cetera. But here he's trying to influence an election and then committing a crime 11 different times while he's sitting president. So for anyone to say this isn't serious, I don't know. I don't see that at all. I see it as very serious.
The opposition is kind of saying it's an administrative error. That's the language that they're using. It was just administration that was wrong, and how can that be a crime?
Yeah, because he was trying to hide it. Because he was trying to hide it from Melania. He says he wasn't trying to influence the election. But okay, so Melania goes and look. When was the last time Melania went and looked at the business records and the entries into the books and records of the Trump organization? Like, that just, doesn't happen.
It's not a very strong argument, is it? I just want to mention something about the politicization of the DA's office, because, the fact that Alvin Bragg has to publicly announce that he is a Democrat, it's like whenever you see his name written in brackets, it says Democrat after it. From where I come from in Europe, and certainly the way the law works in the UK, nobody in any kind of law enforcement or the legal departments would ever have to talk about their politics, because politics should not be in the law, right? So for me, it's completely alien, the idea that you would have to kind of nail your colors to the mast. And because obviously it can be used against you. And Donald Trump is not just saying that he's a Democrat and therefore he's out to get him, but he's also claiming it's racist because Alvin Bragg is black and Donald Trump is white. And, he's playing the white race card. I mean, just explain if the US has ever operated in a non-political fashion in this kind of legal system. Is this a new thing? I mean, because to me, I don't get this one.
I don't blame you. It's I agree with you. So the U.S. isn't a monolith. Obviously, it's made up of 50 states, and there's also the federal government. And within each state there are counties and cities and et cetera, et cetera. And I say that because so there are prosecutors at all levels across the United States. Right? There's the U.S. attorney for the Department of Justice, right, is federal, and they appoint U.S. attorneys within each district, if you will. So those are appointed positions, but they're still slightly political, right? Because a Democratic president is going to install Democratic, United States attorneys, and as the head. The line prosecutors, politics should absolutely play nothing into the line prosecutors. No one even knows what you are, and you're not allowed to get involved in politics in the Manhattan DA's office because of what you just said. You're not supposed to be political at all. You just go and do your work. And I could tell you what a few people's politics were, but not necessarily most, because most people, it's not a thing in the office. But so just getting back to the rest of the country. So then you have the attorneys general, which is the highest state level, like Letitia James is the attorney general. That's an elected position. I don't know if that's elected in every state, or some states may appoint their attorney general. I don't know. But then you get to the DA level, the district attorney level. And in New York State, there are 60 district attorneys because there are 60 counties. And each one is elected, and each one is the highest law enforcement officer of that state. And it is, I agree with you, it is sort of strange, but I don't know if other states have appointed positions or elected positions, but I agree with you.
It does a disservice, doesn't it, to the public at large?
It really does. And, I remember when I was with Cy Vance, I remember one case in particular that he got a lot of heat for not bringing. It was not a Democrat versus Republican kind of case, but it was a high profile case that he got a lot of heat for not bringing. And people were saying it's because a particular defense attorney donated to his campaign. And I remember thinking at the time, I was the one who's very involved in that decision. I have zero window into who donates to what campaign. I know it's public information, but never looked at it, never thought about it. It was never a thing. But, people, because you are an elected official, you have to go out and raise money unless you're independently wealthy. And that creates the appearance of conflicts. But as the person sitting there making the decision, there was no conflict, like I said, but the public and the press, it's like they want to see something where it doesn't exist. But, you have to be aware of that. And as a result, it does create a problem. I do think the best way to elect a prosecutor would be nonpartisan and not, you don't accept money from people, because, it just makes it infuses an unnecessary level of politics and other questions and other compromising questions into decision making about cases.
Maybe you're like me and you sometimes struggle with what to wear, finding pieces that go together, and the hassle maybe of changing clothes for different activities. Well, Rhone's Commuter Collection is the most comfortable, breathable and flexible set of products. Commuter Collection offers the world's most comfortable clothes. You never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone Commuter Collection. And with Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. With Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love feeling fresh. I love a technical fabric, and that makes me kind of confident knowing that the clothes are looking after themselves. Well, the Commuter Collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to rhone.com/weekendshow and use promo code weekendshow to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to Rhone, RHONE.com/weekendshow and use code weekendshow. It's time to find your corner office comfort. But the tragedy of that is that it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And,
well, it didn't used to.
The Supreme Court is stacked in a conservative direction, or an extremist direction, if you consider, even Roe versus Wade reversal would be considered an extreme position. And yet it was, very clearly a majority decision on the Supreme Court, because Donald Trump was able to pack the court in that way. But as I say, from my perspective, and the British judicial system, legal system is revered around the world. Do you think it's revered because it is non-political, and because I just cannot see how anybody can get justice at whatever level, whether it be Supreme Court right the way down to a kind of a local court, if there is politics involved? And it's as you say, it's right that the US kind of loves to have teams. There's this obsession, it's like it's sports, it's cheerleaders. It starts in schools where they try and pit people against each other. this concept of competition.
I've been
it's very
to, I'm sorry,
infused in the culture, isn't it?
I've been to an English soccer game, or I should say football game.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily make that, American.
But judges don't talk about their football allegiance.
They don't? Okay.
Not really, no.
All right. Yeah, look, no, it wasn't like this before. It wasn't always like this. It's just.
When was the change? Give me the year. Like when do you think the shift happened?
Look, judges, some across this country, some judges are elected, some judges are appointed. And even in New York, you have both. You have the New York State trial level courts have both elected and appointed judges. It's a mixture. And I couldn't necessarily tell you the politics of most of the judges or any of the judges, because although that's you run or you get appointed by a particular person, you're supposed to look at the law, right? You're not supposed to necessarily put your own opinion. You're supposed to just call balls and strikes, and just be really objective. And I think our judicial system we used to think our judicial system was like that, and that's what we believed. And I think what we're seeing now is that it's not necessarily the case. I'm not sure I don't know that it changed or that we became more aware. I mean, we, to be completely honest, for the first 20 years that I was a prosecutor, I felt that, we wore the white hats and that we always did the right thing, et cetera, without any kind of self-reflection or insight into the fact that we were, by and large, only, incarcerating people of color, and how racist the criminal justice system is. Even if, I used to find that to be very hard when people would say things like that to me, because I would say, well, I'm not racist, but thankfully we have educated ourselves, and we have learned enough to see what mass incarceration has done, what we have done to people of color in the United States. And so although we thought we were calling balls and strikes, we really weren't, frankly. We were really just focusing on one thing. And so I think our awareness has changed about what's going on in our judicial system, whether it's judges or prosecutors or anybody else. And that's why Donald Trump calling Alvin Bragg an animal, putting up a meme where he has a baseball bat to his head, and essentially saying the law doesn't apply to me because I'm privileged and white. That's what he's saying. And that's what he's trying to, when he says make America great again, that's what he's trying to do. He wants to go back to the other way, when it was just, put what he considers animals in prison, hold them accountable. When the Black Lives Matter protests happened and people were protesting and looting in the streets, there was a huge divide about whether or not that's violent or that's protest, right? But he'll be the first one, him and all his people will be the first ones to say, those are violent animals, Alvin, control your own people, control your own crime. Well, directing your attention to Jan 6 and Marjorie Taylor Greene going to prison to visit the people who are in prison and calling them patriots, the 1,000 people that the Department of Justice have prosecuted for the insurrection. Make no mistake, this is all about race. This is when he says make America great again, he's saying make America white again. Make America, the place where the white people can get away with, cooking the books and faking the business records, or not declaring things on taxes, or, we all did it where, my property's worth this or not worth that because I can get a loan or not get a loan. All the old boy club people, that's what they all did. And that's what they all do. And God forbid you try to hold one of them accountable. And suddenly, it's reverse racism, and it's political and it's whatever else he wants to say. But, racism in this country I believe is this country's original sin. Slavery is our original sin. And we need to figure out a way to move on from it, because we never have, whether it's started, it started with slavery, and it is, continued throughout history, where, we've had segregation and we've had Jim Crow laws, and we've had it so that people can't, when you look back at like even just real estate, you couldn't get a loan because you were Black, or in certain areas because you were Black. And as a result, they can't get generational wealth, et cetera, and schools and whatever. Like it's just until we resolve this issue. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't have any idea what the answer is. I'm not calling for any particular, response to it, but it is a problem. It is a problem. And
the answer is wokeism, isn't it? I mean, really, that's the answer. Is for everybody to be thoughtful about minority groups and people who are going to have a harder route in life because of these historic negatives regarding the historical timeline of the US, and yet wokeism is being used as a kind of abusive term to across everything now.
Yeah, but
that was
I will
like
say,
the one chance to twist it, to turn this around, wasn't it?
Yes, you're right, but I think the wokeism people have gone a little too far. I mean, they get a little out of control with some of the stuff they say. I think it's education. It's not wokeism. Yes.
But aren't they the same thing? I mean, wokeism is just a phrase. It's become a meme.
I know.
But ultimately, it is education.
My 26-year-old daughters are probably, hopefully, they'll never hear this, because they'll be so upset with me for making that statement, what I just said. I guess I don't know. There are times when I sometimes hear certain. I think education. Look, I educated myself, when Cy Vance became district attorney, the first thing he did, and this was in 2010, the first thing he did was he said, we're going to bring the Vera Institute of Justice into the DA's office, and I want to do a racial bias study. And I was like, what are you talking about? We're not racist. I'm not racist, and that's what everyone thought. And rather than get my, hackles up and get up and say, what are you talking about? I said, you know what? I want to educate myself on what people are saying. People are saying that there is racism in the criminal justice system. I truthfully didn't get it. I didn't see it. I thought, I've been helping Black people my entire career. I've sat in my office hugging, Black moms whose Black sons have been murdered by people, and I'm helping them, and I'm, being with them, and I'm loving them. And so I'm not racist. What are you talking about? I'm helping the people, the Black people in our community. And so I truly didn't understand what people were talking about. And I'm feel very lucky that I had the opportunity to educate myself. And,
what changed for you? Like, what was really the trigger point for you that made you realize that you maybe weren't doing enough, but you hadn't fully understood the scale of the problem? Was it your white privilege that did it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I read, what I did was I watched a few movies like 13th. I read a bunch of books. I participated in a Harvard executive session, actually 2 of them, where it had, and frankly, it was people of color around me who didn't, who on the one hand felt like it's not my obligation to educate you. It was exhausting for them because, there were people of color in the DA's office in particular who were prosecutors who were having their own personal reckoning about the damage they've done and what was happening in society. And, they were exhausted at having to explain it over and over and over again. And I really appreciate that they didn't give up and that they kept going and, kept educating society at large. And rather than turning away from it, I tried to educate myself. And, honestly, my kids had a lot to do with it. I remember I know we were here to talk about Donald Trump. So if you tell me if you want,
this is important.
Tell me if you want to stop this. But I remember during my kids are in their 20s, and during a couple of years ago when the Black Lives Matter protests were, it was like George Floyd and there were lots of protests and looting in the streets. The Manhattan DA's office, I was chief assistant at the time, and I think it was also during the pandemic. So most people were working remotely. And so, you had this like fear of, this was before the vaccine and all that. So you had this like fear of death, right? You're like, people were dying left and right in New York City. We were one of the places in the world that, it was
like a war zone.
It was like a war zone, and a lot of people were losing loved ones, and it was a really challenging time just from a, emotional standpoint like that. And then at the same time, you had these, Black Lives Matter protests and things happening in the street. And there were a lot of people of color in the office who were really having a lot of feelings about what was going on and about their role as a prosecutor. And it was during that time, I think, that we were having these meetings, these Zoom meetings with, various groups of people in the office and hearing what they had to say. And in the middle of it, I remember there was a case where, or a situation where there was a Black Lives Matter protest, and there was one of the leaders of the protesters who took a bullhorn and put it up against a female police officer's ear, and I guess screamed in it or did that loud noise and broke her eardrum. And that's considered assaulting a police officer, and which is a felony. And so the police reviewed the videos of who did it and figured out who it was and figured out where he was and decided to go out and arrest him. And normally an arrest like that is a simple, you go out and you put handcuffs on a person and arrest them. But, the police basically treated him like he was Osama bin Laden. They had helicopters above his house. They had, surrounded him with like SWAT teams and whatever. And he live streamed it on Facebook the entire time. And, like Facebook Live or whatever. So I have my kids, because since I'm working from home, my adult children, watching this poor guy, sitting in his house with, live streaming this thing where he's going, I think I'm going to die. I'm Black, and the police are surrounding my house, and they are, they have guns and SWAT teams and they're, helicopters, and I'm under siege. Like, I think I'm going to die. So I'm live streaming this all so you all see it. And my kids are like, Mom, you're the number 2 in the Manhattan DA's office. Do something. Meanwhile, I'm telling them to stop talking to me because I'm on the phone talking to the prosecutors on the other end, because the cops were like, we need an arrest warrant to go into this guy's house to arrest him. And then we had and so I have like from both sides, I have the cops saying, we need an arrest warrant. I've got my kids like, basically, Mom, look what's happening. And I just remember at the time thinking, this is a big decision, right? This is a really big decision. And that for me, so P.S., we didn't give them the arrest warrant. We gave the guy an opportunity to surrender the next day, which he did. And, he surrendered, and he, was held accountable for what he did.
But that's the lesson, isn't it? That letting someone go and picking them up another day is a far more mature move than shooting them in the back when they're running away. And that really is the tragedy of the American justice system is that it never gets to court because a police officer thinks that from a traffic stop, somebody deserves to be executed on the side of the road.
Yeah. So look, this is the other side of that is, if you look at how many times, the NYPD responds to something like 1 million 911 calls a year, right? And how many fatalities are there a year? 1, 2, which is 1 or 2 too many, but the other, million minus 2 times, they do show restraint and they do de-escalate and they do know what they're doing. And that's where I get upset sometimes because, I do have tremendous respect for police and I thank God for them. And I believe in law and order. I do. And it is, the men and women who have decided to spend their career and their life, saving me, basically, I will be forever grateful to them. I always was aware of that as a prosecutor. Like, it's easy for me to second guess you here sitting at my desk where my life's not in danger. I don't know what's going to happen, so, and most of the police officers I've dealt with are, frankly, the best people on earth. But there are times when what they do is atrocious. And there are some really bad police officers, just like there are bad DAs and everybody else. And so that's part of my issue is I'm not in that all cops, are bad camp at all. In fact, I'm a huge fan and I want to build them up. I don't want to tear them down, and these people who want to defund the police, et cetera, and want to attack the police and they wonder why, go ahead, attack the police. Guess what's going to happen? Nobody in their right mind is going to go be a police officer that you want to be a police officer. And then look what happens to society, you got to build people up in life. You got to, support them. And I just think, I don't know, I remember sometimes, you see these police officers standing on the street and people just screaming at them and spitting at them and throwing things at them. And I would I find that atrocious. I walk up to them and say, thank you for your service, because I do appreciate them. I know what it's like to feel scared and to something to happen and you call 911 and there's no better feeling than a police officer coming and saving you. But that's because I'm white. That's because I'm white. If I'm black, and I'm scared and something's happened, I'm not calling 911 and hoping the police.
But just imagine that, not having a service to call, knowing that it could end very badly for you.
And that's why it has to change. It has to change and it has to get better. And that's what has to happen. And I guess my point is it can change, but we have to do it in a way that's educational and not accusatory and not in a way that's, tearing people down. That's just my belief in life.
Defund the police was a very bad slogan because it didn't mean that. And it was weaponized by the right to make it look like the left wanted to spend less on policing. All they actually wanted to do was reallocate funds so that, instead of it being about people showing up in uniform with guns, there was more money being spent on kind of community policing or mental health services and that type of thing within that.
Which obviously should be done.
Yeah, and that's really the tragedy, is that you're against defund the police, but you're for everything defund the police is for.
Of course.
So it's marketing, and it was not done. It was not done very well.
Which is my issue with wokeism, by the way, because wokeism, I think, is bad marketing. It's about education.
Well, because it's been weaponized. Really, that word came out of. I actually think it kind of came out of the black community initially. And was used for very different reasons, and it has been weaponized. And I'm actually kind of proud of being woke, and you certainly have woken up in the descriptions of what has changed for you in that experience with your kids and with that event that you didn't issue the search warrant for. That could have been your woke moment, and I think we should be proud of those moments. Green Chef has expanded their menu. Now choose from 30 recipes weekly with the option to mix and match meals from very different dietary preferences in the same box without changing your plan. This means you can order vegan one day and then keto the next. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for eating well with dinners that work for you, not the other way round. Bring more flavor to your table this spring with Green Chef's wholesome, elevated recipes featuring seasonal, organic produce and unique farm-fresh ingredients. Also, Green Chef is the only meal kit that is both carbon and plastic offset. Green Chef offsets 100% of their carbon footprint as well as 100% of the plastic in every box. I absolutely love Green Chef because of how easy it is to cook the meals and how delicious each meal is. Our favorite recipe is the Parmesan crusted chicken. It's incredible. Go to greenchef.com/weekendshow60 and use code weekendshow60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. That's greenchef.com/weekendshow60 and use code weekendshow60 to get 60% off plus free shipping. I just want to talk about like bad apples and unscrupulous lawyers. Let's look at, there's a couple of characters who are working for Donald Trump at the moment who are, they're almost like kind of comedy lawyers. You know, if you had to go to central casting and get yourself a kind of mobster style lawyer because these people are going on TV and they're saying a lot and talking a lot, but you know, they're actually contradicting themselves in many ways. Can you talk a little bit about a couple of these characters who've put themselves on the front line recently on behalf of Donald Trump and why they might not be the best lawyers at this stage of the investigation?
Yeah, well, look, there's at least 2 times that judges have found that lawyers, that it was more likely than not that 2 of Donald Trump's lawyers were either unwittingly committing a crime, you know, being allowed to commit a crime, or intentionally committing a crime with him. So as such that the attorney-client privilege didn't apply, and they had to testify or either provide their emails and documents and communications or testify. I mean, you know, what does that say to you? That, and I'm not saying they committed crimes, but they could have been unwittingly, you know, used to commit crimes, because, you know, there's the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. And I'm talking about John Eastman, where Judge Carter, you know, found months ago, you know, that it was more likely than not that a crime occurred. And so there was the attorney-client privilege didn't apply there, as well as Evan Corcoran, you know, this week has to testify before Jack Smith's grand jury, you know, because again, the judge, Beryl Howell, found that it was more likely than not, or that there was a prima facie case that a crime was, you know, occurred, and so therefore the crime.
So he knew that there were documents in Mar-a-Lago, even though he'd said to the FBI that they were all returned. Is that the story there?
It's unclear exactly, because this is all happening under seal. So all we know is what's being leaked out. But normally any conversations or documents or emails or anything between the attorney and client is privileged. And so Evan Corcoran wouldn't, who is all things Mar-a-Lago, wouldn't have to testify before the grand jury or provide this information. But the judge found, I think in 6 different areas, that he did have to, that he pierced the privilege and said, you know what, it's not secret anymore. Whatever you know, whatever you have has to be turned over, because Jack Smith has made a prima facie case that a crime has been committed, and it was either knowingly or unwittingly done by you, Evan Corcoran, but certainly Donald Trump committed the crime. And
Joe Tacopina's the other one, who you know, he's like the godfather, and there's a footage of him circulating from he went on CNN in 2018, and he basically said that, you know, the whole hush money payment thing with Stormy Daniels is a crime. Yeah, and now he is defending Trump for that very crime. Yeah, I think he's going to be conflicted out of this case. I don't see how he can represent Trump here, given the fact that he represented, or at least consulted with, and you know, there's an ethical rule 1.9 of, you know, the in New York State ethical unified court system rule that I think applies here, and it says that you can't, you know,
you can't represent one side and then represent the other. There's a conflict. And B, if you have like confidential information that you got from that, you can't then use it on the, and you can't harm, use it to harm your second client in the same matter. So there's all kinds of ethical rules here. And I think he'll ultimately be conflicted out of this case.
And then the final one of the three stooges is Alina Hubba, who is, again, a kind of TV personality. These people, it's almost like they're doing it for the publicity, because, legally they have very thin arguments. Their knowledge of the law is minimal. They're kind of like joke lawyers that you would kind of rent to come and do like a lawyer-ogram at a party.
Yeah, look, I mean, the lawyers I know and the lawyers that practice the way I practice, frankly, is you don't use the law as a tool. The law means something, and the legal system means something. But Donald Trump uses his lawyers to use the law as a tool, and it's a tool to delay, and it's a tool to just try and mess up, just try to create havoc in the justice system or the legal system. And most lawyers who are reputable would never do anything like what they're doing, just because.
But they wouldn't represent Trump either, would they? I mean, is that the problem, that he just can't get decent representation because he's so obviously guilty?
No, look, if you're a criminal defense attorney, you don't, most of the people you represent are guilty, right? And that's what you do. And everybody's entitled to representation. Everybody, even Donald Trump. I think the reason most people wouldn't represent him is because he's not looking for their expertise. He's not looking for their legal judgment. He's looking for them to do his bidding on what he wants. And like, I would never put him aside. I would never represent someone like him. Somebody who hires me for my expertise and my judgment. If they just want to hire me to do their bidding, but it's not something I believe in or that I would do, I would never do that, because that's sort of being used inappropriately as a tool to manipulate the system. And in fact, some of these attorneys are clearly either committing crimes with them knowingly or unwittingly. I mean, I think in Georgia, for example, you're going to see people like Rudy Giuliani and others. I think they're going to be charged with crimes. The Midas brothers and Popak will say MAGA stands for Make Attorneys Get Attorneys. Because they're either knowingly or unwittingly being used to commit crimes with him, and that's why most lawyers I know wouldn't represent him, because they're not going to do that.
Yeah, Giuliani is kind of an example of how someone's fall from grace can be so very public. I mean, of course, he was revered as New York mayor, right?
He was, let me tell you something. I lived across the street from the World Trade Center and was home on 9/11. It was the scariest day of my life. And I remember how I felt in the coming days and weeks and months. There was no better voice to hear or watch than Rudy Giuliani. I mean, he was America's mayor. And I was one of the people who just thought he was, was so grateful for him. He led us through a very difficult, traumatic time in our nation's history. And I look at him now and I don't know what has happened to him. I think he may have, dementia or something. Like, this is not the same person.
Do you think he was always that guy? Do you think he has changed? Do you think it was a confidence trick? Was he, I don't know much about his tenure as mayor, other than, as you say, being, taking control of the situation after 9/11 and giving a voice to New Yorkers. But, was there always corruption there? Was there always that kind of bead of hair dye running down his face when he got into hot water? Because he has gone so far in the wrong direction now that you have to ask, were you always like this? Yeah. You were just better at hiding it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. I have no idea. All I know is he's gone insane.
Yeah. Insane is is an interesting word. I still think that his press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping will go down as one of the great moments in US political history, not least when he was told that the networks had called the election for Joe Biden whilst he was talking. It was one of those moments. Just finally, I know you're not into predictions, and nor am I. That's not what we do, but, you know, how is this going to end? Because, you know, obviously this whole thing about Trump being arrested on Tuesday just was Trump, in the same way that he was the only one who told people that Mar-a-Lago was being raided in the middle of the night. I mean, that came from Trump. It didn't come from the FBI. So will there be a moment when he's taken out in handcuffs, or is this going to be done in a very kind of respectful and subtle way so as not to draw attention?
It normally would be done in a very respectful and subtle way. And that's how these surrenders typically go. I've been involved in many, actually on both sides, as a prosecutor and now as a defense attorney. Walk in, the person, you know, it's very non-dramatic, right? You go in, you get fingerprinted, you get photographed, you go to the judge. This is a non-violent crime, and so bail is not even going to be set. So you don't have to worry about anything. You just go, you get arraigned, you plead not guilty, and you walk out the door. And that's it. You know, it's actually not a big deal. My prediction, though, is that he is going to make this a spectacle. If there's a perp walk, it's going to be because he perp walked himself.
Yeah.
You know, he's going to make this, he wants to be the victim, you know, of this, and he's going to milk this to the end. So as far as handcuffs and all of that, I have no idea. That's going to be the Secret Service, who they're the ones who have to keep him safe. They're going to decide exactly the mechanics of how this goes and when and where and what door he walks in and what other people are allowed in the building. I mean, don't forget, this is a criminal court building filled with lots of people who have committed crimes. And, you know,
he has to go to New York for this.
He has to go to New York for this. Yep.
So would he have to be removed from Mar-a-Lago? Would they have to go and get him from Florida and put him on a plane, or would he have to surrender himself?
They're going to give him an opportunity to surrender. And that's the best way to do it, because don't forget, law enforcement in New York don't have jurisdiction in Florida. They only have jurisdiction in New York. So they can't actually arrest him or do anything. I mean, you know, I think to myself, he's going to announce the day that he's supposed to surrender, that he's going to say, I'm going to surrender, you know, because I have nothing to fear and I'm going to surrender. But, you know, his clarion call about, you know, violence and destruction and protests and death and whatever he said, what's going to happen is he's going to tell them what day and time, and his people are going to create a barrier so that he can't get out. And he's going to say, I would have surrendered. I was willing, but look at these patriots who don't want their president to leave. And then law enforcement's going to have to figure out what to do after that. Probably they'll just give it time for him to surrender. They'll figure out a way to get him out. But I think he'll milk that for a day or two. And then at some point he'll show up, and, you know, because I don't see it happening the other way, which is, you know, you apply for a governor's warrant, and then with Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, who then goes and applies to Ron DeSantis in Florida for, you know, for an extradition warrant, and then he signs it, and then he gets extradited. I mean, I don't see that whole thing happening here. I think instead he's just going to turn this into a television spectacle, because he loves that.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your prediction, for your expertise, and it's certainly food for thought during this kind of historic period, really, isn't it? And I'm pleased that it's the details of the crime that, certainly in our conversation, are what matters, and not the fact that this is an unprecedented moment that seems to be the thing that the media is very keen to talk about. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, thank you for joining us on The Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Please subscribe to The Weekend Show on YouTube or as an audio podcast. And don't forget to visit patreon.com/5minutenews for exclusive Patreon-only videos, bonus content, live Q&As for members. So subscribe and get more of my work right there on Patreon. Join me next week with a brand new special guest and 3 more factual news stories to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.